In this episode, the series takes a slight shift by taking a presentation that we've cut into 3 parts. So over the next 3 weeks, we're going to take a look at the content that we covered. And what did we cover? Well, in this particular segment, we're going to take a look at
Murphy bed. Very simple. Now it's a guest room.
As well as the GN in 1970 had a few issues that we're cleaning up. We went from DC to DCC, we explained why and how, as well as hear what the curmudgeon's gripe of the week is this week. Only in this episode of SOO The Milwaukee Road.
Hello and welcome everybody, I'm William Sampson. Today we're going to be growing with our railroads. And you say,
well, what is that supposed to mean? Is it for beginners or advanced modelers?
I would say it's a combination of both. The exchange of ideas is what's most important, but we're going to start looking at kind of bench work as well as electrical, and then even the details that come with model railroading. This is more a look at a lot of different techniques, tools, and things I've learned over the years to be able to learn more about the hobby and get better as I've gotten older. I've grown with it. Now, my dad, we started a railroad back
1980?
Brain fart.
That's when I was born. And he had already been in model railroading. So I've been exposed to it my entire life. There's an advantage to that because I see a lot of different things. When you're a young kid, the bench work is up, so you really get a good look at all the wiring, the servos, and everything that goes into the bench work itself. So let's start there. The bench work.
Where do you start?
First, just start. You have to have something. You just need, I know guys that have done stuff on old blank doors. They've done old model railroads that have gotten torn down. They've used a section of it. So you want to just at least start with something. The key is just to have a flat surface. You don't need to get into the mountains and having all the plaster and all the other stuff that's going along with it, because that's where you grow and you get better with it. So I would say for materials, I use Homosote. And Homosote is a nice construction material. It's a sound deadening board that's used, commonly found at Menards. But there are other big box stores, I think, that will carry it out there. But it's a softer material. And that just allows you for easier nailing, spiking, gluing if you desire to do that. But I put that on top of a piece of plywood, so it's kind of a sandwich. And then the base is actually a frame made out of 1x2s. And to give you a look at kind of what I'm referring to, here's a cross section of what I'm building with. So here's the Homosote. This is the plywood, and then this is the benchwork, 1x2. Very simple construction. I actually build this in such a way that I'm creating modules that as my railroad is built, I can take these and I can slide it in and add on to it and add on to it. And then when it comes to taking it out, I can just back out the screws that are holding the sections together, and I can take it out. So I try to leave my joints in areas that are somewhat accessible and close near the edge. That would be a connecting track, but I don't put the joint right on another joint, a seam, just for expansion and contraction purposes.
Train 41T arrives in Neenah from the south along Highway 41 on June 8, 1985, behind the perfect merger combination of M&S Milwaukee Road in the Highway livery, plus 3 SOO line units, making an impressive shot. It's just too bad they merged. They look kind of cool just as they are. What model EMD unit leads this lash up in 1985? Is it A, an SD38, B, an SD39, C, an SD40, or is it D, an SD40-2? We'll find out later in this episode.
This stuff does expand and contract a little bit in the Midwest. We do have climate shift, obviously, with it getting hotter and colder between summer and winter. You can use a dehumidifier to help regulate your railroad room to try to prevent against that. It happens with the pink foam too. I know there are guys out there that use the pink foam. They swear by it. I've used it a little bit on modules. Haven't been totally sold on it, but I haven't used it to build an entire railroad. And the reason why, again, I grew up with it. I grew up with the Homosote plywood with a framework technique. My dad did an open, kind of a skeleton bench work that he had risers that were installed to vary your heights and your grades. So that's the style that he ended up using and developing. I'm currently, at least in the portion that I'm working on right now, just building it as a shelf railroad. Staying on the perimeter, nothing over 24 inches in terms of the depth of the layout. And then the length, it just varies by the room that I'm in. Currently I'm in a 10 by 12 room. The overall construction of this railroad has been just as I have shown. So I ended up getting materials, and anybody that's out there, you got to start somewhere. I say 4x8 sheet of plywood. A lot of guys cringe at it. They're like,
Oh, don't start with a 4x8.
I guess if people like running in circles, there's a certain level of repetitive nature that is had there, but it's much like you think about as a kid growing up, train around the Christmas tree. What excites the kid? Every time that train goes by, there's a sort of fascination that's had there. The power supply they used was just straight DC. It was very simple. So is a 4x8 sheet of plywood with just a DC power pack and a DC locomotive. It's easy, it's fairly inexpensive. I would suggest if you want to get beyond just the 4x8 sheet mentality, rip that thing in half and go with a 16 by 2 foot. If you've got the space to do that, just go whatever length of the room and go point to point. That is very much what I've done in the space I'm working with currently for my Hiawatha Elevator District. I base it in 1985, but that's just a time frame I'm working within, and it allows me to be able to create something that is in a small enough space and the area is reusable. I mean, this here behind me, this is a Murphy bed. I have the ability to be able to just pull this down, and I'm not going to pull it all the way down, but to give you an idea, Murphy bed. Very simple. Now it's a guest room. And now it's back to a model railroad. So you have flexibility in your spaces. Think a little bit outside the box when you're starting your railroad itself, but if you've gotten yourself to that point, be creative with the solutions. I know in my dad's case, again, he started in 1980, but he tore it down, rebuilt in 1992. It was in 1994, we had Gary Friesman out and a few other Twin Cities modelers. They gave us a few suggestions. One of the biggest ones that we took was making it point to point. My dad's railroad was a folded dog bone. We ended up chopping the railroad up, adding a helix, putting in a second deck, and in fact, our electrician, Colin, he had his home off of Como Avenue in St. Paul. He had a yard in there and he was going to be moving, so he took that out and we put it into a Suburban and drove it to St. Michael. So from St. Paul out to St. Michael, our Wilmer yard was in St. Paul, already built, wired, everything was already done on it, and we integrated it into the railroad. And again,
Thinking outside the box.
we ended up, my bedroom, it's a shift or a split level home, so my bedroom was up a half a floor. And we ended up popping through the upper level of the basement into the knee level high, which is the staging. So we put west staging in there. Thinking a little bit more outside the box, that has allowed us to be able to expand the operations. There are 10 tracks out on the west side, and then out of the east, we've got 3 tracks, as well as a few other options of developing trains that are in Union Yard. But I digress, and
We're not talking about that. We're looking at the bench work.
thinking outside the box and being able to come up with creative ways to be able to set up your system. And when you look at track, I alluded briefly there about DC. I think DC is a great place to start. We started in DC. So that Railroad 92 built, Colin was our electrician. He's a master electrician, so he was able to really dive into this thing. It was a 5-cab system. We had a lot of great technology at the time. I mean, he had things that were blocked, and we had fail-safe, so if you went about to blow a switch, you wouldn't go through the switch, and all right, mind-blowing to begin with. But DC can be even simpler just by just having the 2 wires in that round piece of track. That's where you got to start, and you're going to add on to it. You're going to grow. What we found is eventually getting my dad to DCC. My wife and I eventually bought him a DCC system for Christmas. That kicked things off. We hooked it into the system. We took a DC railroad into DCC. Little hiccups every now and again, but we, for the most part, made a fairly seamless transition in doing so. It is, I think, a revolutionary element in the hobby, and most modelers that have been in it for some time would agree that DCC has changed the hobby. Now, is that where you start? I would say no. I would say start with the DC, learn it, basics, and then advance to the DCC. Because on top of that, costs do come into a factor. If you look at the cost of DCC, you're going to spend a few hundred on the command station, you're going to spend a few hundred on decoders, you're going to spend more money on locomotives and trying to get this stuff up to speed. And you're going to get frustrated with a lot of the stuff that is inundated with things not working and things shorting and why isn't this and why isn't that. Start with simple, build up, and learn from there. That's what I did. I learned incandescent lighting to LEDs with DC to be able to then use resistors and try to refine that type of system. There's a lot to be learned there.
Speaking of a lot to be learned, we're going to figure out what unit is on the lead. Did you guess and say A, C, D? Or did you say B, the SD39? Because if you did, you'd be correct. The M&S only had 2 of these, and this is one of the 2.
So I look at that DCC versus DC and think, DC, it is a little bit easier. It's for where guys can start out. We all have to start somewhere. Think Christmas tree. Train around the Christmas tree is just that simple start. But then you look at it and you say, assembly and reassembly. Where do I start? As I mentioned, my model railroad, I'm building this in a modular setup, so that ability to be able to expand and contract, if you will, not just physically the materials, but if I say I want to tear that piece out, I can. I basically unhook a couple tracks, pull out a couple screws, and then I can pop that section out, maybe work on it on a workbench, refine it, and then reinstall it or revisit it altogether. This particular setup is made in such a way that the Hiawatha Elevated District didn't have a big curve in the halfway point. It was one straight shot. So if I move into a place that I've got a longer run of about 22 feet, because I know I'm 12 foot by 10 foot, I can take out that corner section and I have it designed in such a way that it'll just be able to go straight. So I could reuse those two pieces. That's thinking ahead a little bit more beyond maybe what most modelers are doing. You might want to just focus on, if you're just starting out, keep it basic. If you're advanced and you're like,
oh, well, I've already done all this work. I don't want to tear it out now and then restart.
An example, just this last weekend, we had an area on the railroad that the staging is very hard to access. There was a turnout that was causing issues. When the locomotives would go through, it would stall. We needed to address it. How do you get in there? Well, right above those particular turnouts, we were able to cut out an access point, and it only took us, built in 92 and doing it today, 20 plus years to be able to go through this process and cut that out. And actually, it's almost 30 years now. But the point is that you're able to go back in there, revisit what you've done. Don't assume that because you've done it, it's cemented in, it's permanent. None of this is permanent. Yes, will it take time to redo? Absolutely. My dad even admitted, he says,
well, Bill's going to dive into this, but that's definitely something I wouldn't.
And, I am. I'm willing to dive into it because I've got the time vested, and I know that when we run operations, I don't want that short happening. I also want to know that our servos are throwing completely and consistently, and it's tough to be able to install something up underneath that only has that much clearance. A design flaw, yes, but something we're able to work with, absolutely. And the last thing that we can look at as far as the bench work is concerned is just having the wherewithal to be willing to change as you go. And that means if it's DC, you can go to DCC. If there's a problem on it, you can go in and fix it. And if it really comes down to it and you don't like it, tear it all out and start anew. I know guys that have started and done multiple railroads. I mean, granted, my dad's only on his second in the home that he's at, but he could very well at any point reset and start over.
Don't think that's happening.
But he could do it. We're going to move forward and take a look at a little bit more of the DCC world, as well as a little bit of DC, but mostly DCC.
With part 1 in the books, can we unravel this riddle next week, as well as figure out the ESU programmer? Part 2 is next week, same train time, same train station.
Alright, here's the curmudgeon coming at you for the grab of the week. This week we're grabbing my people on your railroad, and I'm saying you need to put some people on the railroad, and I'm not talking about one-to-one people, I'm talking about little people. Not those kind of little people, I'm talking about plastic people. And no, I'm not talking about those, that'd be kind of weird, but I'm talking about 187 scale figures. Give yourself a little bit of a town and give yourself some place to go. I mean, who's going to be delivering all these boxcars? Who's getting those goods? You see what I'm saying here? You need to put some people on the railroad. And that's the curmudgeon's grab of the week. And no, I'm not talking about those, that'd be kind of weird.
A big thanks to everybody that watches to the end, that has hit like, hit subscribe, as well as made comments in the past. It's those actions that help share this content, so if you haven't checked out other episodes, feel free to do so. You can also check out the tour of the GN in 1970, as well as the past episodes of the GN in 1970.
70s. And no, I'm not talking about those, that'd be kind of weird.